Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Applied AI Summit. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending upon where you are joining us from virtually today. My name is Dippu Singh. I lead the teams which are focused on the emerging technologies and the AI architectures. And today we are going to do deep dive into one of the most pressing engineering challenges in our industry right now. The title of my talk is Trust but Verify, which is architecting the self-correcting RAG for healthcare decision support systems. We have all seen the incredible demos of retrieval augmented generation RAG, but when you move from a sandbox environment into a high-stake world of healthcare, specifically where an AI's output can, directly influence the patient care, the standard RAG architecture is simply not safe enough. So today we are going to do a deconstruction of how to move beyond that basic vector search. We'll explore how to build a multi-agent, which is self-correcting architecture that does not just confidently generate text, but it also rigorously verifies it against the clinical truth. With that, let's get started. Here is our roadmap for the next 20 to 25 minutes. First, we will set the stage with the current challenges. We'll explore the healthcare imperative, why the standard RAG often falls into a dangerous traps, and why we must prioritize the safety above all, right? Second, we will unpack the solution provided. We will walk you through our high-level architecture flow diagram, breaking down how we orchestrate pre-processing, hybrid retrieval, and most importantly, the self-correcting validation loops. Third, we will look at the key outcomes. We will examine our validation strategy, look at the performance trends, and review the actual accuracy and the latency metrics of this system compared to a baseline. And finally, we will discuss the roadmap ahead, like being completely transparent about the engineering constraints we face, such as legacy and the token cost, and how we plan to overcome them. So let's begin by defining the problem space. To engineer a truly robust AI system, we must deeply understand the environment it will operate in and the specific ways in which the current system fails. In many enterprise domains, if a large language model like LLMs, they hallucinates a minor detail, maybe in an email draft or maybe a marketing copy, it's a minor inconvenience, right? And it's a bug. But in medicine industry, hallucination is not a bug, it's a clinical liability. If an AI agent hallucinates a drug dosage, invents a contradiction, or misinterprets a patient vital signs, the consequences are life altering. And because of this, the high stake retrieval requires a fundamental paradigm shift. We must shift our architectural focus from confidence to verification. The goal isn't just to build an AI that sounds like a confident doctor, but the goal is to build a system that can cryptographically and logically provide exactly where it got its information before it ever presents a finding to a clinician. So if you deploy a standard out of the box RAG pipeline in a clinical setting, you will immediately fall into what we call the standard RAG trap. Our research has shown that the standard RAG usability is often rated as difficult to implement by clinical staff due to two major architectural flaws. The first is the context law. Medical literature and the electronic health records, which are EHRs, they are quite dense and highly structured. When the standard system blindly chunk this text into a fixed 500 token blocks, they trim the critical diagnostic context, right? A system which is mentioned, or maybe an information which is mentioned in page two, it becomes detached from the diagnosis which was present on page four, just for example, right? The second flaw is the retrieval drift. The standard vector databases, they rely on semantic similarity, like they need to be almost similar. But medical terminologies are quite tricky. Just an example, a clinician might query a patient history of hypotension, which is equivalent to low blood pressure, right? Because hypertension, which is high blood pressure, is semantically and lexically very similar, a standard vector search will often drift and retrieve the exact opposite of what you need. And that's why the vector math alone, it lacks the clinical nuance. Now, this leads us directly to the safety imperative. The standard RAG models are fundamentally probabilistic. They are predicting the most likely token which you have provided them. And in healthcare, semantic similarity is not the same as clinical accuracy. And as I mentioned previously, hallucinated doses or fabricated adverse conditions, they are literal life critical risks, right? And we cannot accept probable correct scenarios in this, right? So to build a resilient system, we must implement a verified retrieval in as part of the entire architecture. And we need to architect a system where AI claims are treated with intense skepticism. Right? Our proposed architecture, it introduces multi-stage validation. In this pipeline, the AI is essentially put on a trial by another AI. Its claims must be proven against the source documents before the final output is even approved for the user interface. So how do we actually build this? Let's dive into the technical architecture of the solution, move away from the theory and go into the actual engineering components. So our system goal is to replace the linear black box inference of a standard RAG with a structured multi-agent safety pipeline. And we break this into four distinct stages. Stage one is pre-process. Before we even search, we use the LLMs to clarify, expand, and route the user's query. We have to ensure the question we ask the database is clinically precise. Stage two is retrieval. We use a hybrid execution engine, combining the traditional vector search with SQL execution to handle both unstructured journals and the structured patient data. Stage three is the generation. We package the context and force the LLMs to draft a response that includes the explicit citations. And stage four is all about verifying it. Like this is the critical self-correcting loop, and independent grader agent, it reviews the drafts and understands whether that draft is right or not right and further verifies it. So let's look at the specific engineering behind each of these four stages in detail. So stage one is all about the query optimization. If you ask a bad question, you get a bad answer. So first we use a history resolver. Like clinician often use ambiguous pronouns in a chat interface like what were his vitals yesterday. The history resolver, it analyzes the conversation context and rewrites the query into an explicit standalone clinical search, like what were John's heart rate and blood pressure on March 22nd. Next, we pass this to a query expander. This agent, it understands the medical ontologies. It generates the synonyms and the clinical variations of the query. And by doing this, we maximize our recall, ensuring we don't miss a critical protocol just because the doctor used a slightly different medical term than the author of the document. And finally, the intelligent router, this agent, it acts as a traffic cop. It analyzes the expanded query and determines the required data source. Does this query require looking up unstructured clinical protocols in our vector database, or does it require pulling specific patient vitals from a structured EHR database? And often it requires both of them. So it's a mixed bag of the retrieval. Now, once the query is routed, we enter the stage two, which is hybrid retrieval. Relying entirely on a vector search is a recipe of disaster in our healthcare. On the left, we have our vector search for unstructured data. This query is the medical journals, clinical trial PDFs, and the protocol manuals using embedding models and the cosine similarity. And it is excellent for finding relevant diagnostic tests or the procedural guidelines. But on the right, we implement the SQL RAG for the structured data. Like if doctor asks what was the patient's exact blood glucose level, vector similarity cannot reliably extract that from a massive table, right? Instead, we use a LLM to translate the exact query or the text into a strict SQL statement, and this execute directly against the EHR database. And this guarantees 100% precision for the numerical values, lab results, or the patient time series data. And this is zero guessing. It either returns the exact database value or it does not. Now, in stage three, we move to the Gen AI core. Goal here is to generate an answer package by merging our cross-domain context into a cohesive clinical summary. So first is the context packaging. We take the evidence snippets retrieved from the vector search and the exact data tables which are retrieved from the SQL execution, and we inject them in both them into the prompts. The second is the citation insertion. This is crucial because we use a strict prompt engineering, often utilizing the structured outputs like JSON to force the LLMs to tag every single sequence or a sentence it generates with a unique document identifier or a EHR source key, which has got the information. And it is not allowed to make a statement without pointing to the data structure that it supports. The third is the persona engine. We guide the LLM to draft the response using a medical professional tone, meaning it must be concise, highly analytical, rightly aware about the risks, and stripping away the conversational stuff that LLM generally defaults to. Now we reach the defining the feature of this architecture, which is a stage for the grader agent. In a standard RAG, the draft answer is immediately shown to the user. In our system, the draft answer is intercepted. We spin up completely independent LLM instance, which is grader agent in this case, and its only job is to be an aggressive auditor. It looks at the draft answer and the original retrieve context and asks one verification question. Does this every claim in this answer exist in the provided source context? If the answer is yes, the output is verified and sent to the clinician. If the answer is no, meaning the drafting LLM hallucinated, it summarized poorly or brought in outside knowledge, which the grader agent would reject right away. So it either triggers a redraft loop into the with a strict warning, or if the data simply isn't there, it forces the system to admit information is not found. And this evaluator optimizer loop is the ultimate defense against the hallucination. So what happens when you take this multi-agent self-correcting architecture and deploy it against a complex healthcare data? Let's look at our validation strategies and the key outcomes which we derived. So to ensure the utmost safety, our validation strategy actually employs three distinct mechanisms. First is the majority voting, like for highly sensitive diagnostic queries, we don't just rely on one generation call. We run three parallel generation calls simultaneously. The system acts as a committee and it only outputs the final answer if at least 2 out of 3 LLM calls agree on the specific diagnostic details. And this smooths out the inherent randomness of the generative models. The second is the hallucination filter. This is a deterministic layer. If the grader agent flags a sentence or if a generated claim lacks a proper citation tag linking back to a high confidence retrieval match, that specific claim is automatically redacted from the final output before the user sees it. The third is the semantic re-ranking. After our initial vector retrieval, we pass the chunks through a cross-encoder model. This re-ranker is specifically trained to prioritize the modern clinical relevance. And it ensures that a clinical guideline updated in like 2024 is mathematically pushed to the top of the context window, and it is overriding the outdated historical notes which is there maybe from 2010. So the impact of these validation layers is captured in this error reduction stats. When we tested standard RAG implementation against a complex clinical query, we observed a hallucination rate of approximately 18%. And in a medical setting, 18% is entirely unusable. However, by implementing the self-correcting RAG architecture with the grader agent, we dropped the hallucination rate down to just 2.5%. And we call this the verification dividend. By shifting from single generator to a multi-agent validation engine, we achieved roughly 7x reduction in the factual errors. And this massive gain in accuracy is what allows us to cross the threshold from a neat tech demo into a system that commands a true technical and a clinical trusted value. Now, looking at the hard metrics side by side really tells the story here. The retrieval accuracy, specifically for pulling precise EHR data, it jumped from 62% in the standard RAG to 88% in our system. And this is almost entirely thanks to the intelligent router and the implementation of the SQL RAG for the structured data. Our verification success rate, meaning the percentage of the final answers that successfully pass the strict breeder agent audit, was around 95%. Now there is a trade-off: latency. The standard RAG returns an answer in about 4 seconds. Because our multi-agent loop and the re-ranking, our end-to-end latency increased to roughly like 10 seconds, even with like paralyzed calls. And we'll discuss this in a moment. But in healthcare, we gladly, trade this 6 second of compute time for a 7x reduction in the errors. And ultimately, our overall accuracy, it climbed from 74% to 91%. So while the outcomes are highly promising, this architecture is not without its challenges. As engineers, we must be honest about our constraints, and let's look at the roadmap ahead. So we are actively, navigating some of the key constraints. Four of them are highlighted in here. Top four. First is the latency penalty, which we just discussed. As I mentioned, a multi-agent loop and the radar check, it adds like 3 to 5 seconds to the response time. We mitigate this through parallel execution of our retrieval agents wherever possible, but it still remains a focus for optimization. The second is the token cost. Verification is expensive. By summarizing, routing, grading, and potentially redrafting, we consume roughly like 3 times more the tokens than the standard interface. And this is a premium, right? We currently pay for the clinical settings, but we need to drive this down to scale effectively. The third is the interoperability. The SQL RAG component is incredibly accurate, but it requires high integrity SQL schemas. The EHR databases, they are often messy in nature, and it must be heavily cleaned, indexed, and documented for the LLMs to query them reliably. And finally, the PII protection, which is the personally identifiable information protection, that is of utmost importance. The healthcare data is strictly governed by the privacy laws. So we must apply rigorous deterministic redaction rules to all the prompts to prevent any protected health information from leaking into the foundational LLM logs. So to address these constraints, our roadmap is now broken into 3 phases. In phase one, we are looking at the real-time EHR monitoring. Right now, our system is reactive, like it answers the questions, but we want to move to a more proactive monitoring where the grader agent, it runs continuously in the background, analyzes the live EHR updates, and alters the clinicians or alerts the clinicians any kinds of protocol deviations, not just in near real time, but in real time. In phase two, we aim to tackle the token cost and the latency issues by deploying the on-premise safety small language models. The small language model SLMs, they are becoming incredibly capable nowadays. By deploying a fine-tuned SLM locally, specifically to handle the narrow tasks of, say, history resolution or grading, right? We can bypass the latency issue and the cost of hitting the large foundational API models for every step of the loop, which is time consuming and also not that cost effective. In phase three, we will introduce the multi-model verification. Medicine is highly visual, right? We plan to incorporate the medical imaging like X-rays and scans and directly feed them into the RAG context, utilizing the power of the multi-models, power their computational power to verify any kind of textual findings against the visual diagnostics data which we can derive from them. So in conclusion, if you are building AI for high stake environments, you cannot just simply trust the generative AI capability of an LLM, right? You must architect or maybe re-architect the systems that verify every single claim around the ground truth. By utilizing the intelligent routing, SQL integration, and the independent grader agents, as we discussed in our architecture, right, we can build the AI agents that can truly support rather than endangering any clinical decision making. With that, thank you so much for your time. I have placed a QR code on the screen connecting to my LinkedIn. I'm always excited to talk with the fellow engineers about the RAG architectures, agentic workflows, and the AI safety. So please feel free to reach out, and I would be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.